Hey everyone, it's Sevy. Raiden is having her rerun banner, so it's about time for me to make a full guide on her. In this video, I'll give a breakdown of her talents and kit, talent priorities, constellations, best weapons, best artifact sets, her artifact stat priorities, and her best team comps. There's a lot to cover since she's a pretty complex unit, so let's begin. Raiden's role is basically to battery your team while being an on-field DPS. Let's look at how her kit comes together to create her unique function. Let's start with the skill. When you cast her skill, you see her cool eye above your active character. It has a 10-second cooldown and 25-second duration, so you can very easily have a 100% uptime on her skill. First, her eye procs coordinated attacks when you deal damage to enemies every 0.9 seconds. It doesn't work on shielded enemies like Abyss Mages, since no damage number appears, so keep in mind that Raiden's skill isn't meant for breaking shields. Second, her skill is a source of electro particles, with around a 50% chance of generating a particle upon proccing. This lends some slight unpredictability to her particle consistency. Third, her skill gives her teammates a burst damage bonus based on their burst cost. So for example, Xingqiu has an 80 burst cost. At Raiden's talent level 9, she gives a 0.3 burst damage bonus per 1 energy cost. So multiplying 0.3 by Xingqiu's 80 energy cost, that gives a 24% burst damage bonus to Xingqiu's burst. You want to cast her skill at the start of a battle so that her coordinated attacks, particle generation, and burst buffing are immediately available. Next, let's break down Raiden's burst, which has several mechanics at work. Her burst is what's used to battery the team and become an on-field DPS. When Raiden casts her burst, she deals a huge initial AoE Electro Slash. Then, her subsequent auto attacks are converted into Electro Burst damage. This means that buffs for normal attacks and charged attacks will not buff Raiden's attacks during this state, but effects that buff burst damage will. Take note as well that within this state, Raiden doesn't proc Beto's nor Electro Traveler's bursts. However, she does proc Xingqiu's Rain Swords and Thoma's Fiery Collapse. While it's completely okay to spam left-click once Raiden enters her burst state, there are a few optimal combos for the min-maxers out there. First is 3 times N3C plus N1C, which is 3 normals and a charged attack done 3 times, followed by 1 normal and 1 charged. Second is 2 N3C plus N2C plus N1C. Some nice things about practicing these attack combos is that A, it lets you time her burst exactly since her burst state only lasts 7 seconds, and B, it doesn't need any dash cancelling to perform. In fact, dash cancelling with Raiden is somewhat discouraged unless you need to chase or dodge an enemy. Then whenever Raiden hits opponents with her attacks in her burst state, she regenerates flat energy for her party. This energy regen is not affected by your unit's ER stat. It's consistently a flat value. That energy regeneration can proc a maximum of 5 times within her burst state, and the amount regenerated is based on her burst talent level. For example, at talent level 10, Raiden regenerates 2.5 energy per proc, which can total to 12.5 energy if procced 5 times. Then there are 2 more talent mechanics at play here to understand her complex kit. The first is her resolve stacking mechanic, and the second is her ascension passive. Let's start with the resolve stacks. Resolve stacks are used to increase Raiden's damage when she's in her burst state. When your teammates cast their burst, they give Raiden resolve stacks, which you can see when the dots on her chakra desiderata ring light up. The highest resolve stack per energy spent comes at burst talent level 10, where you get 0.2 resolve stacks per 1 energy. The number of resolve stacks accumulated contributes to Raiden's burst talent damage multiplier in both the initial burst slash and following attacks. So how are the resolve stacks to damage computed? Let's take a Raiden national team rotation as an example. Raiden here has a burst talent level of 12, so she generates 0.2 resolve stacks per 1 energy. First, we cast Xingqiu's burst, which costs 80 energy. Multiply that by 0.2, you get 16 stacks. Then we cast Bennett's burst, which costs 60 energy. Multiply by 0.2 again, that's 12 stacks. Last is Xiangling's 80 cost burst, which brings in another 16 stacks. Total that all together and Raiden now has 44 stacks before she casts her burst. Now we can refer to her talent scaling page to see how much multiplier value it adds. On this talent 12 burst, per resolve stack, she gets 7.78% added damage to her initial slash. That's around 342% added. For her subsequent attacks, she gets 1.45% added damage per stack. So with 44 stacks, that's an additional 63.8% multiplier. You can see now how much damage these resolve stacks bring in for Raiden. To make it clear, the damage bonus is not added with burst damage and elemental damage bonus. Rather, this counts as directly added onto the damage multiplier of the burst. Raiden's first passive also lets her gain 2 resolve stacks whenever party members get an elemental particle or orb, which can be triggered every 3 seconds. If all those sound complicated, then we can just simplify it in Razor speak. Teammates use burst. Get glowing dots. Use burst. Eat glowing dots. Raiden damage strong. And finally, there's Raiden's second ascension passive, which adds even more utility to her energy recharge stat. First, she further increases the energy regenerated by her burst based on her energy recharge stat over the base 100%. Each ER point results in 0.6% increased energy generation. So a Raiden with 200% ER, which is 100 additional ER, gives a 60% increase to the energy restored. If she restores 12.5 energy by our example earlier, increasing that by 60% gives a new total of 20 energy regenerated. Moving on, the passive also increases her electro damage bonus by 0.4% per ER point over 100% ER. So if, again, she has 200% ER or 100 additional ER, multiply that by 0.4% and she gets an innate 40% electro damage bonus. All in all, ER has more value for Raiden as it improves her offensive and support capabilities as compared to other units whose ER is often just for increasing personal energy gain. This is why Raiden's own ascension stat is ER, and most of her best weapons use an ER stat. At this point, you can see how her kit makes her a great team battery. However, let me just remind you that Raiden does not solve all your character's energy issues. You still need to have adequate ER stats on your characters for smooth rotations and burst uptimes. When it comes to her talent priority, simply prioritize her burst first, then her skill. You don't need to level her normal attacks at all. Again, her auto attack damage during her burst form scales from her burst talent level, not her normal attack talent level. Now let's look at her constellations, some of which are just crazy good and some of which are quite underwhelming. C1 lets you get your resolve stacks faster and helps her synergize better with electro units since they give more resolve stacks. C2 greatly unlocks her DPS potential by ignoring enemy defense. Very huge bump in damage, highly recommended if you want your Raiden to hit really hard. It's highly beneficial for Hyper Raiden teams too. It kind of feels like this should be a higher constellation, so it's nice that it's just her second. C3 increases her burst level by 3, which builds on the previous constellations. Noticeable damage bump, but not as huge as C2. I wouldn't recommend going further than this. C4 increases your team's attack after using her burst. It won't see much practical use since it's very likely that if you have C4 Raiden, most enemies won't even be alive past your second rotation. Even in Abyss, this won't be as useful, and if you already have C3 Raiden, then you'll breeze past the time limits anyway without the help of C4. C5 increases her skill damage, which is somewhat insignificant, and C6 reduces your team's burst cooldowns up to 5 seconds, which in theory could help shorten your team rotations by a bit. However, there are 2 problems with this. 1. Raiden's usual team rotations are already perfectly timed well without this, so there's no compelling reason to get this constellation. 2. While it shortens the cooldown, it doesn't guarantee that the energy cost will be ready by that time. Either way, it's an underwhelming C6. If you're aiming for constellations to make your Raiden feel like the Archon she is, then getting C2 or C3 at most will be all you need. Now for her weapon choices. My build guides usually tackle this after the artifact and stat build section, but we'll discuss it now because depending on your weapon choice, this affects how you should build her artifact stats. so Raiden technically works on most attack crit or ER pole arms. I won't go through all of them, but what I will focus on are the notable ones, in particular the Engulfing Lightning, which is her best in slot and has more significant implications on how she's built, and the Catch, which is the most accessible and top 4-star option for her, given that it's free and refinable to R5. Let's start with the Catch. This free-to-play weapon can be acquired through the fishing minigame and rewards. You have to catch certain types of fishes, then exchange them for the weapon and refinements at the fishing shop in Inazuma, so it will be locked until you reach that region. If you need additional info on how to get the Catch, I recommend searching other guides that focus on that, but as a free-to-play weapon, it's well worth the effort for your Raiden and most polearm users in general. It has virtually everything you need for a good Raiden weapon. While the attack stat it gives is on the lower side, it does give a good amount of ER, additional burst crit rate, and burst damage bonus, all of which benefit Raiden a lot. While other 4-star weapons are workable on her, such as a Favonius Lance or Wavebreaker's Fin, the Catch is simply the best recommendation thanks to how accessible it is and even competitive versus most other R1 5-star polearms. As for the 5 stars, they're all very good options. Staff of Homa and Primordial Jadewing Spear function as good stat sticks and give you a good crit baseline, but will then require you to bring in more ER substats from artifacts. Skyward Spine is somewhat like a side-grade version of the Catch since it gives high attack stats, ER, and some crit rate, and some attack speed bonus, letting you pull off attack combos more easily in her burst duration. If you manage to pull one and it's your best option, you can just settle for it rather than the Catch. However, the Engulfing Lightning is her best in slot, pulling ahead of other 5 stars and allowing for a noticeably higher damage potential. It also makes building her artifact stats easier. But why? Engulfing Lightning gives her a high base attack and lots of ER, and its passive effect synergizes extremely well with her kit as expected. As you can see, she gains an attack bonus based on her ER stat. Furthermore, she gains more ER upon using her elemental burst, so when you're thinking about her ER stat, the bonus ER should practically be counted too. Raiden's kit, as we discussed before, innately gains bonus energy regeneration and electro damage bonuses from her ER stat, and since this weapon triggers an ER bonus, it complements those effects well. However, the weapon now makes it so that her ER also provides additional attack stats. This means that building ER on her artifacts isn't as big of a damage loss compared to other weapons, since it partially gets converted into attack. I'll discuss the implications further in my artifact stats section. But to wrap up the weapon section, my overall recommendation is, if you don't have any other 5-star weapon to spare for her, use the Catch, and it's still going to be close to them in damage potential. If you have other 5-star options to spare but aren't Engulfing Lightning, you can go with either them or the Catch. It depends if you have other polearm users who need a weapon. If you have neither the Catch yet or other 5-star options, then just work on farming the Catch. It's really just that good. If you have Engulfing Lightning, then congrats, you have her best in slot. For Raiden's artifact sets, you have very few options to consider. For low AR, to prioritize her energy recharge, you can use 2-piece Scholar, 2-piece Exile, or a 4-piece Exile even. But having no sets is okay, as the artifact's main stats are your main priority, which I'll be discussing soon. For high AR, it's really as simple as farming a 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate set, which is in Inazuma. This set is essentially tailor-made for Raiden since it adds a burst damage bonus based on her energy recharge stat. It will take a while to complete a set, but that domain is very resin efficient, because both Shimenawa and Emblem pieces can be used by a lot of other characters too. If you're locked out of Inazuma, don't bother targeting any other set for her until you reach the Emblem domain. Now that we better understand Raiden's weapons and artifact sets, we can talk about her stats. Raiden is a more complicated unit when it comes to artifact stats because of the interaction of her ER with her damage bonus, battery ability, and whether or not she's on Engulfing Lightning. So first, I'll give you some general stat goals to aim for so you can have a well-performing Raiden. All of this will assume you're using a 4-piece Emblem set. Afterwards, for more advanced players, I'll let you in on some stat min-maxing info. Starting with general stat goals, for her ER stat, you want 200% minimum, and it's still safe if your ER stat reaches 250%. This is a good baseline for her to do her job and get her burst up effectively in most instances. Once you reach this, anything extra will add more to her team battery ability than her damage. Yes, more ER still gets converted to electro damage bonus due to her passive, but getting crit rolls still yields a higher damage increase. Specifically, a crit roll is double the power of a single ER roll. It will mostly be up to your artifact luck if you will need an ER Sans to reach this goal, but ideally, assuming she's on, at the very least, an ER weapon, you could get her ER from all substats and keep an attack Sans. However, if you have Engulfing Lightning, then stacking ER becomes more acceptable. There's also the risk of overstacking ER, particularly if you don't have Engulfing Lightning. I'd say going past the 250 mark gets progressively excessive, as that means you're trading offensive stats and sacrificing her DPS potential too much for marginal increases to her energy regeneration and electro damage bonus. You may want to consider eventually reallocating ER stats towards crit stats instead in that case. Then you basically just want a crit circlet that gets her close to a 1:2 crit ratio. Try to aim for at least 60 to 120. Now, I get questions about whether it's better to stack attack percent, ER, or electro damage bonus on Raiden's artifacts. This is something I've asked myself before too. She's actually one of the most complicated characters to give stat build recommendations for, since Raiden's scaling on ER introduces more factors to consider for her battery support utility and damage output. You also introduce other scenarios, like if she's used with a buffer or if she has Engulfing Lightning equipped. As such, when I give recommendations for optimizing her stats, do remember that these are general tips, not universal hard rules, since we cannot account for unique battle conditions or RNG stat differences among different players. My recommendations are also with the assumption that, for the most part, she's being used with attack buffs like Bennett, Sarah, or the Noblesse set. The first dilemma: what should be her goblet, attack percent or electro damage? It goes without saying that if one artifact has significantly better substats, then you ought to prioritize using that. But what if they're of equal or close quality? On a polearm that's not Engulfing Lightning, the difference in her total damage is very close in favor of the electro damage bonus. So choose whatever has better substats or what allows you to complete the set and equip better pieces. But on Engulfing Lightning, the Electro Damage Goblet yields higher damage since Engulfing Lightning stacks a lot of attack already. In either case, you want to stay in Bennett's circle or carry Sarah's buff, since that's what's giving the Electro Goblet the edge. So if you're not confident about maintaining their buff or positioning, keeping an attack goblet can just be easier to use to give more consistently higher damage. But if she's in a Eula team that doesn't use Bennett or Sarah, Raiden will really just want an attack goblet then. The next dilemma: should her Sans be attack percent or ER? Again, if one has better substats than the other, you should likely go for that. But in general, attack percent will still yield a greater overall DPS increase compared to an ER Sans. The main reason to run an ER Sans, assuming it has similar substats, is if you want to A. ensure that her burst is reliably ready, B. if you want her to regenerate more team energy, and C. if you're using a weapon that doesn't have an ER substat, so you need a lot more ER artifact stats to meet Raiden's ideal ER range. But if she's on Engulfing Lightning, give her an ER Sans. Engulfing Lightning will just convert that into an attack bonus and, of course, add more energy regeneration. Finally, for her team comps. When comping Raiden, you of course want members who will benefit a lot from Raiden's battery and burst buffing utility, or those who can support Raiden during her on-field DPS window. Some of Raiden's best teammates include characters whose bursts are significant to their kit and have high energy costs, such as Xiangling, Xingqiu, Yae, since Raiden's kit boosts their damage and helps with their energy needs. Then you have Raiden's buffers, Sarah and Bennett, to help amplify her on-field damage. Then Anemo, Viridian, and Venerer holders in general to reduce the enemy's electro resistance and swirl electro-related reactions. Kazuha is the best bet for giving Raiden a big damage boost too. Raiden also pairs well with physical DPSs like Xin Yan and Eula as she triggers Superconduct and buffs their burst damage. There are some tried and tested teams that synergize extremely well and utilize much of Raiden's potential. Raiden National is composed of Raiden, Xingqiu, Xiangling, and Bennett, a variation of the original national team. Raiden buffs and batteries Xiangling and Xingqiu's bursts and provides electrocharge and overload reactions. Then Bennett buffs Raiden during her burst mode to deal much much more damage. Sunfire over Vape is composed of Raiden, Xingqiu, Bennett, and Jean. In this team, Jean is ideally on an Elemental Mastery 4-piece VV build, as she helps swirl around Bennett's self-infused pyro to trigger reactions while shredding elemental resistance. You'll see Vape, Overload, and Electrocharged reactions come together. Hyper Raiden teams are where your team DPS is largely concentrated into Raiden's damage output. The original team composition is Raiden, Sarah, Bennett, and Kazuha, or another Anemo Shredder. Here you can see her teammates are meant to buff her damage a lot. However, you can vary this comp. If you don't have a Sarah or a C6 Sarah, you can instead use Lisa equipped with a Thrilling Tales to buff Raiden's attack. Alternatively, you can also use a C6 Fischl instead, who doesn't buff Raiden but is a strong source of individual damage, especially since she can snapshot Bennett's and Kazuha's buff. Finally, the newest variation is the Raiden Yae team, which includes Bennett or Sarah and an Anemo Shredder. In this team, the team DPS can be more closely divided between Yae and Raiden. Raiden also helps a lot with Yae's burst uptime, which also has a 90 cost. So everyone, that's all for this updated Raiden guide. There was a lot to talk about, but overall she's just a really cool, beautiful character that brings so much to the table. If you want some general insights on why I think Raiden is worth pulling, you can check my video on that linked in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and comment down below what teams you like to play Raiden with. Consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already for more Genshin guides and content, and I'll see you soon. Take care!